The salesman didn't even try to hide it. He stood at the glass entrance of Meridian Motorworks, one of those sleek, too-quiet showrooms on King Street West in Hamilton, the kind where the air smelled like money and fresh leather, and he laughed. Not a polite laugh, not the kind you cover with your hand. He laughed the way men laugh when they believe no one important is watching. The car that had pulled into the lot was a 1968 Ford Galaxie 500. Two-door hardtop. Blue once, the kind of deep navy that used to mean something back when Detroit was still building cars with their chest out. Now the paint had oxidized to a chalky gray in patches, and one rear quarter panel wore a crease that had never been straightened. The front bumper had a slight bow to the left where it had kissed a hydro pole sometime in the 90s. The tires were mismatched. The passenger side mirror was held on with a strip of black electrical tape that had started to peel at one corner. The man who climbed out of it was named Dale Pryor. He was 51. Stocky through the shoulders, the kind of build that came from decades of actual work rather than a gym membership. His hands were calloused and permanently stained at the knuckle creases with traces of grease that no amount of dish soap fully removed. He wore clean dark jeans and a flannel shirt, navy blue, tucked in, which had been his daughter's suggestion that morning. He had combed his hair. He'd thought about wearing his good jacket, then decided against it. It felt like trying too hard. He had driven 40 minutes from Ancaster, where he lived in the house his father had left him, in the neighborhood where he had grown up, on the street where he had learned to ride a bike and later learned to drive. He had driven 40 minutes because his daughter Caitlin had turned 16 3 days ago, and she had asked for one thing, not a party, not a phone. She had asked to come to this showroom with him, to look at the kind of cars they would never buy just to see them up close. She had read about Meridian online, had shown him their Instagram. "Just to look, Dad," she'd said. "I just want to walk around and look." Dale had called ahead. A receptionist had told him they were open to the public, that no appointment was necessary, that all were welcome to browse. Caitlin was 15 steps behind him. She had her mother's height, already 5'8", and her mother's way of moving through a space, careful and observant like she was reading a room before committing to it. She wore a green canvas jacket and her hair was pulled back in a low braid. She was watching everything. The salesman's name tag read Bryce. He was maybe 30, with the kind of jawline that got him hired for customer-facing roles and the kind of confidence that came from never having been wrong about anything important. He had a Bluetooth earpiece in his left ear and a smile that appeared and disappeared like a screensaver. "Help you find something?" he asked. He was looking at the Galaxie as he said it. "We're just looking," Dale said. "My daughter wanted to see the cars." Bryce's smile made a brief reappearance. "Sure," he said. "Sure, absolutely." He held the door open, but his eyes had already moved back to the parking lot, to the Galaxie sitting between a white Porsche Cayenne and a Lexus that cost more than Dale's mortgage had been. He said something under his breath to another young man standing just inside the door, a colleague with slicked hair and an expensive watch, and the colleague glanced at the Galaxie and gave a short, silent laugh. Caitlin saw it. She said nothing. She followed her father inside. The showroom floor was vast and hushed, the way cathedrals are hushed. Vehicles sat on polished concrete pedestals under gallery lighting, each one surrounded by discreet littles with spec sheets in matte cream cardstock. There was a Bentley Continental GT in British racing, a restored 1963 Jaguar E-Type in silver, an Aston Martin DBX. Near the back, a Mercedes AMG GT Black Series that looked like it had been designed by someone who was angry at the concept of restraint. Caitlin moved slowly through the space. She didn't touch anything. She read every spec sheet. She took out her phone twice, then put it away. Dale watched her and felt something in his chest that he had no word for. Her mother, Christine, had died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it means business, and by then it was already 6 months and counting. Caitlin had been 12. Dale had been the one who held things together, which in practice meant he had not held together at all, in private, and had held everything together in public, which is a different thing entirely and costs more than people realize. He had gone back to work at the shop, Pryor Automotive, which his father Gordon had opened in 1909 and which Dale had inherited and expanded, now running a crew of 6 in a building on Wilson Street after Christine's funeral. Not because he was okay, because being at the shop was the only place where the work in front of him was clear. He looked around the showroom and thought, this was a mistake, not because of the cars. The cars were extraordinary. He understood that better than most people in the room. He had spent his adult life inside engines, and he recognized what it took to build something like the E-Type or the GT 500, the way a carpenter walks into a house and reads the bones of it. The mistake was thinking Bryce wouldn't notice the Galaxie. Bryce had noticed the Galaxie. He drifted over to Dale with his hands in his pockets and a smile that had shed any pretense of warmth. "That yours out front?" "It is," Dale said. 6868. Bryce tilted his head. He made a small sound, something between a laugh and a sigh, performative in the way only people with an audience manage. His colleague had drifted closer. A man in a suit near the Bentley had turned slightly. "It's quite a project." "It's not a project," Dale said. "It's a car, right. Bryce nodded, slowly, the way you nod at someone who has said something they believe but that you have decided to let pass. "Just for future reference, we do have partnerships with a few haulers if you ever need to move something like that. They're very discreet." He smiled again. "You wouldn't have to drive it." The colleague made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Close enough. Caitlin had stopped in front of the E-Type. She was looking at it, but her shoulders had gone still, and Dale knew, the way parents know, that she had heard every word. He felt the familiar heat come up through his neck. He had felt it before in other rooms, in other conversations, and he had learned over years what it cost him to let it out and what it cost him to keep it down. He kept it down. "We'll just finish looking," he said. His voice was even. Bryce shrugged and moved daughter. She didn't turn right away. She kept her eyes on the Jaguar's long hood. "You okay?" he said. "I'm fine." She paused. "Are you?" "Yep," he said. She looked at him then. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown, and her mother's way of looking at him that meant she knew exactly what he wasn't saying. "We don't have to stay. We came to look at the cars," Dale said. "Let's look at the cars." They spent another 20 minutes on the floor. Caitlin asked a young woman near the back, one of the staff who had the decency to be actually helpful, about the 1963 E-Type's restoration history. The woman told her it had been a California barn find, a full nut-and-bolt restoration completed by a shop in Vancouver, and that the engine was the original 3.8-liter straight-six, rebuilt to factory spec. Caitlin listened carefully and asked 2 follow-up questions that made the woman smile with genuine surprise. Dale stood slightly back and watched his daughter, and felt the thing in his chest again that he still had no name for. They were walking back toward the entrance when the woman came in through the side door. She was in her late 50s, silver hair cut short and precise, wearing dark slacks and a wool coat in charcoal gray. She moved through the space with the unself-conscious efficiency of someone who had been in charge of things for a long time and had stopped thinking about what that looked like. Her name was Catherine Voss. She was the CEO of Meridian Group, which owned 4 dealerships across Ontario, and had recently acquired a restoration consultancy in Oakville. She was in Hamilton for a board meeting that had run long and had come by the showroom to check on a consignment piece they were prepping for an auction in Toronto. She came through the floor without stopping to talk to anyone, nodding once at a manager who moved to intercept her, and then moved away again when she didn't slow down. She would have walked right past the entrance. But she had gone to the front window to look at a delivery truck that was partially blocking the fire lane, and that was when she saw the Galaxie. She stopped. She stood at the window for a moment. Then she pushed through the front door and walked out onto the lot. Bryce was at the entrance again. He watched her go outside with a slight frown, the look of someone trying to figure out which script applied. Catherine Voss walked to the Galaxie and stood beside it. She looked at the rear quarter panel first. Then she crouched. She was wearing dress trousers, and she crouched down on the asphalt without any apparent concern for this, and looked at the undercarriage. She stood up and looked at the roofline. She put her hand flat on the rear deck and pressed, lightly, as if reading something through her palm. Dale had stopped just inside the door. Caitlin was beside him. Catherine turned and looked at him through the glass. She walked back inside. "Is that your car?" she said. Her voice was direct, with no particular warmth and no particular coldness. "It is," Dale said. 68 Galaxie 500, 2-door hardtop. "That's right." She looked at him steadily. "Who did the frame work?" Dale paused. It was not the question he had expected. "I did," he said. "Yourself, myself, and my dad, originally. He started the restoration in 1991. I picked it up where he left off." Something shifted in her expression. "The C-pillar," she said. "The way it was reshaped, that's not original sheet metal." "No," Dale said. "The original had rust through at both quarters, all the way into the C-pillar on the driver's side. We replaced the lower quarter panels and did a custom patch on the pillar. My dad made the patch. I finished the bracing." "What did you use for the patch?" 18-gauge cold-rolled. Cut to template and welded in 3 sections. My dad didn't like doing it in one piece. He said it was more honest." Catherine looked at him for a moment. "More honest," she repeated. "His word," Dale said. "Your father, was he a fabricator?" "He was a mechanic. Pryor Automotive on Wilson Street in Ancaster. He opened the shop in '79. I run it now." Catherine was quiet for a moment. She had the look of someone processing something that mattered. "The bumper," she said. "The front. It's slightly off-center." "I know," Dale said. "My dad caught the hydropole on River Road in 1996. He always said he was going to pull it, but he never did. Said it reminded him to pay attention. Something moved across Catherine's face that was too brief to name. Bryce had drifted close again, with the cautious posture of someone who wasn't sure whether to approach or retreat. His colleague was watching from near the Bentley. Catherine turned to look at Bryce. It was not a long look, it wasn't a loud one, but something in it made Bryce take a small, reflexive step backward, the way you step back from heat before you realize you've moved. She turned back to Dale. "Do you have time to talk?" Dale glanced at Kate. Her face said, "Yes, we have time," Dale said. Catherine led them to a small room off the main floor, a meeting space with a round table and decent chairs, the kind of room where contracts got signed. She asked one of the staff to bring coffee, and then she sat across from Dale and leaned forward slightly with her forearms on the table. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "and then I'm going to ask you something, and I'd like you to hear both before you respond." Dale said nothing. He waited. "I run 4 dealerships," she said. "I also recently acquired a restoration consultancy, Eastfield Restorations, in Oakville. You may have heard of them." He had. Eastfield was known in the community. They had restored a 1957 Bel Air that had been in a national magazine, and they'd done a Shelby Cobra replica that had sold at Barrett-Jackson for a number that Dale had read about and then set down. "We have a contract with a private collector in Toronto," Catherine said, "who has a 67 Galaxie 500, 4-door. Original 390. It's been sitting in a climate-controlled garage for 11 years. The body is sound, but the frame has issues and the interior is a full replacement. We need someone who understands this car, not just the mechanics, which any competent shop can handle, but the character of it, the decisions about what to keep and what to change." She paused. "The C-pillar work on your car is the best amateur fabrication I've seen in 20 years. That's not a compliment designed to sell you something. It's an observation." Dale said, "I'm not an amateur." "No," she said, "you're not. I used the wrong word. I apologize." She said it simply, without fuss. "What I meant was, you're not a restoration shop, you're a mechanic who happens to know how to do this." "My father taught me," Dale said. "Then your father knew what he was doing." She picked up a pen and turned it in her fingers, a small, habitual gesture. "The question I want to ask you, is your shop set up to take on a project like this? Not the mechanical work alone, I mean the full restoration. Decision-making, sourcing, fabrication where needed, lead role." Dale sat back. He looked at his hands on the table. He thought about Wilson Street, about the 2 lifts and the welding bay and the parts room that still had his father's organizational system, everything labeled in Gordon Pryor's blocky capital letters, faded now but still legible. He thought about the 6 people who worked for him, 2 of whom had been there since his father's time. "I'd need to know the scope," he said. "Of course, and the timeline. Flexible, within reason. The collector isn't in a hurry, he wants it done right." Dale looked at Caitlin. She was sitting very still, the way she sat when she was trying to memorize something. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Please," Catherine said. "Why come out to the lot? You were walking somewhere, you stopped because of the car, but you could have walked past." Catherine was quiet for a moment. She set the pen down. "My father had a 65 Galaxie," she said. "He drove it until I was 11, when the engine finally gave out. He always said he was going to rebuild it." She paused. "He got sick before he got around to it. The car went to a neighbor who chew." He looked at Dale steadily. "I've been looking at Galaxies ever since, not to buy one, just to look." The room was quiet. "I understand that," Dale said. "I thought you might." Outside the glass wall of the meeting room, the showroom floor hummed with its discreet, expensive activity. Bryce had relocated to the far end of the floor and appeared to be extremely interested in a clipboard. His colleague had found something important to do in the back office. Catherine Voss reached into the breast pocket of her coat and put a business card on the table. "Think about it," she said. "Take a few days. Talk to your crew. If you want to come out to Eastfield and see the car before you decide, I'll arrange it." Dale picked up the card and looked at it. He put it in his shirt pocket. "One more thing," Catherine said. She looked at Caitlin. "You asked Sandra in the back about the E-Type's restoration history." Caitlin straightened slightly. "Yes, you asked good questions." Catherine looked at her directly, with the same level attention she'd given Dale. "Do you know cars, or do you just read about them?" Caitlin thought about this for a moment. "I know some things," she said. "My grandfather taught me some. My dad teaches me some. I read the rest." "What did your grandfather teach you?" "He taught me how to read a weld. He said if you can read a weld, you can tell who did the work and whether they cared about it." Catherine looked at her for a long moment. "He was right," she said. "That's exactly right." She stood, buttoning her coat. "There's an apprenticeship program through the Ontario colleges," she said, as if the thought had just arrived, though it clearly hadn't. "For automotive restoration. The application period opens in March. Sandra can get you the information if you want it." She said it lightly, without pressure. Caitlin said, "Thank you." They walked back through the showroom floor. The Bentley gleamed under its light. The E-Type sat where it had always sat, unbothered by the afternoon. Dale and Caitlin walked out through the front door and into the gray Hamilton afternoon. The Galaxie sat in the lot, still looking like what it was, battered, faded, carrying every decade it had lived through without apology. Dale stood beside it for a moment. He put his hand on the roof, the same way Catherine had, flat and light. He thought about his father pulling this car into the driveway on a Saturday afternoon in 1991, already talking about what it could be. He thought about the two of them in the garage through that first winter, Gordon in his wool hat because the heat never quite reached the far end, Dale handing him tools and asking questions. He thought about the patch on the C-pillar, his father's hands, the smell of welding flux. He thought about 1996 and the hydro pole on River Road, his father furious with himself for about 48 hours and then quietly deciding to leave the bumper alone. He thought about Christine, who had never cared about cars but had always understood why this one mattered. "Dad," Caitlin said. He looked at her. She was standing with her hands in her jacket pockets, looking at the car the way she sometimes looked at things she was trying to figure out how to say. "Grandpa would have liked her," she said. Dale thought about Catherine Voss, who had crouched down in her good trousers to look at an undercarriage, who had used the wrong word and corrected herself without drama, who had driven a long way out of her way because she couldn't stop looking at a Galaxie that reminded her of her father. "Yeah," he said, "he would have." He unlocked the car. The door opened with the particular sound it always made, a sound Caitlin had heard her whole life. She got in. Dale walked around to the driver's side and got in and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel before he started it. The engine caught on the first turn it always did. The 390 idled rough for about 15 seconds the way it always did in cold weather, then smoothed out into the low, even rumble that Dale had tuned to exactly this note, not loud, not showy, just present like a hand on a shoulder. He backed out of the spot slowly, and as he did, he saw Bryce through the glass of the showroom standing near the front watching them go. Bryce's expression was the expression of a man trying to recalculate something and not finding the numbers he expected. Dale didn't look at him long. He pulled out onto King Street and drove, the Galaxie moving the way it always moved, settling into its own weight as it got up to speed, the steering wheel with just enough play in it that you always felt like you were in a conversation with the car rather than giving it orders. Caitlin had her window down a few inches despite the cold. The wind caught her braid. They drove across the Skyway Bridge with the bay spread out below them, gunmetal in the afternoon light and the city behind them and the countryside opening ahead. Dale had the heat on low. The radio was off. Between them, in the silence that fathers and daughters build over years of being in this exact car on this exact road, there was something that required no words, or perhaps had already been said in the only language that had ever made sense to either of them. He turned onto Wilson Street 20 minutes later and pulled the Galaxie into the bay at Pryor Automotive. He sat for a moment after killing the engine, listening to the ticks of the cooling metal. He took Catherine Voss's card from his shirt pocket and looked at it. He set it on the dash. Outside the bay door, one of his guys, a man named Dwayne who had worked for Gordon Pryor before Dale had even finished school, walked past with a ratchet in one hand, glanced at the card on the dash and raised an eyebrow. Dale said, "Might have something." Dwayne said, He kept walking. Dale got out of the car. He stood in the bay for a moment, hands at his sides, looking at the Galaxie the way you look at something that has been with you so long you stop seeing it separately from yourself. The bowed front bumper, the mismatched rear tires, the faded blue along the roofline where the paint had gone to chalk. He reached out and pressed one thumb against the C-pillar, over the patch that his father's hands had shaped. The 18-gauge cold-rolled steel cut to template, welded in 3 sections. He could feel the seam under the paint if he pressed. His father had done that. Done it right, done it honest, done it for a car that everyone else had written off as not worth the trouble. Some things Dale had always believed were worth more than they looked. His father had believed the same thing. He had tried to teach his daughter the same thing. And this afternoon, in a room off a showroom floor where someone had laughed at his car, a woman had crouched down in good trousers and read the undercarriage and known, without being told, that this belief was true, that the work was there, that the care was in it, and that it mattered. He picked up the card from the dash and put it in his pocket. He went to work.